We're going to be discovering the day together, finding out all the things that have happened overnight, all the things that are going to be shaping the day to come, and trying to make sense of them, talking to the people who are making the key decisions on all our lives, getting expert reactions, speaking to journalists from the Times, and getting to the bottom of what is going on in the world.
Times Radio launches this morning at 6 across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. Times Radio. Times Radio.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, host of Times Radio Drive Time. I'm going to be doing the news every day, what's happening in the news, behind the news, talking to people who make the news, and we're going to be discussing it and explaining it. And I'm going to give people, now and again, a bit of time and space to tell us what they think.
Times Radio.
Join me, Mariella Frostrup, on Times Radio for a topical blend of arts, lifestyle and news. We'll be using culture and social trends as a sort of prism to look at contemporary life. There'll be news, views, reviews and interesting guests. So join me.
Times Radio.
This is Michael Portillo. Please join me on Times Radio to talk about history, culture, politics, ethics, you name it.
Times Radio.
Hello, I'm Kathy Newman. We're going to be talking to lots of politicians. We're going to be talking to public figures. Lots of chat, lots of discussion. It's going to be great fun.
Times Radio launches this morning at 6 across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. Times Radio. Times Radio.
I'm Matt Chorley. Join me on Times Radio. We'll be trying to explain what's going on in politics, taking all the best bits from the Red Box podcast and morning email and bringing it to you on Times Radio.
Times Radio.
Join me, Gloria De Piero.
And me, Tom Newton-Dunn, on Times Radio. From the Westminster Big Beasts to real voters far away from the bubble, we'll have everything that matters in the world of politics.
And we'll be getting to know all the new MPs. Who are they and what made them choose a life on the green benches?
Times Radio.
I'm Hugo Rifkind. I'll be taking you through the news with some of our reporters and correspondents and the odd comedian to see if it's funny. Then we'll be looking at the week in culture with some of our critics. We'll be looking at pop music. We'll be looking at travel and telling you where you ought to go, assuming you ever again get to go anywhere.
Times Radio launches this morning at 6 across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. Times Radio. Times Radio. An exciting new national speech station is almost here.
Featuring live news,
analysis, conversation,
and the unequivocal world-beating journalism of The Times.
Join Asma Mir and me, Stig Abel.
I'm John Pienaar. Join me on Times Radio.
Join me, Mariella Frostrup.
I'm Giles Corrin.
Times Radio, 235 years in the making.
1st of January 1785, the Daily Universal Register. To bring out a new paper at the present day when so many others are already established and confirmed in the public opinion is certainly an arduous undertaking, and no one can be more fully aware of its difficulties than I.
The affairs of France very naturally engrossed the whole of the public attention.
The ever-to-be-lamented death of Vice Admiral Lord Viscount Nelson.
Nearly 100 of the King's unarmed subjects have been sabred by a body of cavalry.
Ministers have successfully established the principle of the Great Slavery Abolition Bill.
10 minutes past 11, our light brigade advanced. As they rushed towards the front, the Russians opened on them from guns in the redoubt on the right, with volleys of musketry and rifles.
Thereupon, the British ambassador was handed his passports and a state of war was formally declared by this country.
Nightfall brought no end to the public jubilation.
Everything is in readiness for the signing of peace at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon at Versailles.
By 11 o'clock, no assurance had been received that German troops would be withdrawn from Polish soil.
Thousands of people spent last night on the coronation route, having taken up their positions yesterday in readiness for today's procession.
It was 3:56 a.m.
when Armstrong stepped off the ladder from Eagle and onto the moon's surface.
Heroism and horror in China.
Reports of rebel army units fuel fear of civil war.
More than 1 million Germans from east and west held the world's biggest non-stop party in Berlin.
Tear down this wall.
As their sober leaders tried in vain to dampen the euphoria.
16 small children and their teacher were murdered yesterday by a lone gunman.
Terrorists laid waste to the citadels of American capitals capitalism and defence yesterday, with coordinated attacks.
Britain's biggest savings bank will be rescued from the brink of collapse this morning in a deal intended to stave off financial catastrophe.
Revealed the tragic victims of Syria's nerve gas war.
Britain's government has become the subject of an extraordinary bidding war after Gordon Brown.
Britain is bowing out of the European Union today.
Boris Johnson declared a moment of national emergency last night.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. Know your times.
Good morning and welcome to a new voice in British radio. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Asma Mir.
And I'm Stig Abel, and this is the first ever Times Radio breakfast. Thank you for your company. The top stories this morning: the Prime Minister's set to announce a £1 billion school building programme. Britain's most senior civil servant, Sir Mark Sedwell, is standing down. Boris Johnson's paid tribute to his outstanding service, but a former head of the civil service says he was pushed out.
Coming up later, we'll be joined by the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, for his first broadcast interview since contracting coronavirus. We'll hear about his plan to reboot Britain's economy. And on a day of new starts, we'll be live in a maternity ward.
It's Monday, the 29th of June.
This is Times Radio.
First, with the very latest news, here's Alex Dibble.
Asma, thank you. Good morning. £1 billion is to be given to schools and colleges in England to, the Prime Minister says, lay the foundations for the country as it recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. It will form part of a 10-year plan and will be spent on building projects, with the first 50 to begin in September next year. £560 million will go on repairs. Creating space for a rising number of secondary school pupils is also one of the priorities. Boris Johnson will be live on the Times Radio breakfast programme from 8 o'clock, providing further details. Britain's most senior civil servant, Sir Mark Sedwell, is standing down. He'll leave both his roles as Cabinet Secretary and National Security Advisor in September. In his letter to the Prime Minister, Sir Mark's described being fortunate to have served in some of the most challenging and rewarding jobs. Mr Johnson's paid tribute to his outstanding service. But the former head of the civil service, Sir Bob Kerslake, believes aggression lies behind the rhetoric.
The friendly tone of the letters exchanged between Sir Mark and the Prime Minister belied days of hostile briefing, which is frankly unacceptable and follows an unfortunate pattern that's now developed with this government.
Opposition MPs claim Dominic Cummings has influenced Sir Mark's decision to resign. Government officials are meeting those in Leicester this morning to discuss coronavirus testing data as a local lockdown is considered. Public Health England says 866 new infections have been reported in the city in the last fortnight. Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth, who's also the MP for Leicester South, explains what he thinks needs to be done.
Talk of lockdowns, it is dramatising the situation. What we actually need is widespread testing in the communities. We need access to those testing and that testing to be turned around quickly.
A YouGov poll for Times Radio's revealed nearly half the British public wants tax rises to be used to reduce the country's deficit, a major shift away from austerity. In 2009, less than a third supported tax rises. It comes as the Institute for Fiscal Studies warns borrowing this year could be more than £300 billion. When it comes to the NHS, the support is even greater, with nearly two-thirds of people supporting a rise in national insurance contributions to fund the health service. Macmillan Cancer Support's warning that more than 500,000 people with cancer in the UK are afraid to leave the house. The charity's revealed 570,000 patients have barely gone out since the coronavirus crisis began. 21-year-old Michelle was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma for the second time in April. She's shielding with her family and says she can't leave unless it's for the hospital.
For me, it's not worth risking, or even going to Tesco or going somewhere where a lot of people are going. It's just not worth it. So it's a bit difficult. I don't really get much exercise or sunlight.
Macmillan's calling on the government not to let Michelle and others get, in their words, lost in lockdown. Blanket quarantine measures for people arriving in the UK are expected to be scrapped later. It should mean those coming in from countries listed green on a new traffic light system won't have to self-isolate for 14 days. Home Secretary Priti Patel says it's an important tool to control the spread of coronavirus.
The principle around sharing data, the locator form that actually the Home Office has created to capture
capture a lot of this information will absolutely still remain, because we have to keep on top of this disease. We need to know where people are moving. This links into track and trace. This links into the testing regime.
A charge similar to the plastic bag levy is being recommended for home deliveries to cut carbon emissions caused by internet shopping. Same day or even same hour deliveries have led to a rise in vans on British roads. The Department for Transport says it's considering the idea of a charge on transactions, which has been proposed by its scientific advisors. McDonald's, meanwhile, is going to install hundreds of electric car charging points at its drive-thrus. It says the ports in the car parks will be able to provide up to an 80% charge in under 20 minutes. Wet and windy for some northern and central parts of the UK to start today. Feeling cool across the country with only some sunshine. That will be interrupted by showers, which could be heavy and thundery in eastern Scotland. Our top sports story this hour: Manchester City, Chelsea and Arsenal all qualify for the FA Cup semi-finals. We'll have a full sports roundup at past.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on the app. Asma Mir and Stig Abel with Times Radio Breakfast.
Yes, good morning. This morning is all about new beginnings, isn't it, Stig?
Yes, how do you feel? Sleep well?
No, I did not sleep well.
You slept on the sofa.
I slept on the sofa, yeah.
I betrayed the confidence. We're 2 minutes in, I've betrayed the confidence already.
Yeah, thanks for that. I had 2 hours sleep. How much did you get?
I had broken sleep.
Did you?
I slept like a baby, which means I woke up crying every 2 hours. Which is probably about all I could have expected.
Anyway, enough about our sad personal lives. Today is the start of a week which effectively could be dominated by plans to reboot the UK economy. And let's face it, it does need a reboot. We're talking about infrastructure investment, school rebuilding funding. More will emerge over the next few days.
And we're going to be talking to the Prime Minister about those plans and how they'll be paid for later in the programme. We'll think of a few other things to ask him too. We'll also chat to the Mayor of Liverpool, Joe Anderson, and this has excited my daughter enormously, the author Malorie Blackman.
Fantastic. You can get in touch with us. Here are the new numbers for you. Text 87222 and start with the word Times. You can tweet us at Times Radio, or you can email us studio@times.radio. Don't worry, we will be repeating that.
Until we're sick of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we are talking, as we said, to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson later in the programme, and he's announcing £1 billion school programme today. The money will pay for the first 50 projects in a 10-year investment and repairs and upgrades for schools. Let's speak to Sian Griffiths, Education and Families Editor for the Sunday Times. Good morning to you, Sian.
Morning, Asma.
So explain then, first of all, as with all these things, it sounds like a lot of money, £1 billion school programme, and we know that schools are very much on everyone's agenda right now. But what exactly is this money going to do and when?
Well, as you say, it's a £1 billion school building programme, so it seems like a lot of money. And it's going to pay for, 50 schools to start with to be upgraded, refurbished, in some cases probably pretty substantially rebuilt. A lot of money has been promised for the schools in the North and the Midlands. So I expect, when the spending starts, it will start there. And we know that this is desperately needed for schools. I mean, some of our school buildings in England are in a dire state. Leaky roofs, classrooms too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. Not a lot of outdoor space. And I think the coronavirus crisis has really thrown that into sharp relief, because as secondary school head teachers in particular have tried to figure out how are they going to get all their pupils back in and try and do some social distancing, they've realised just what a state their school buildings are in. So, yeah, this is much needed. Teaching unions are welcoming it this morning, but of course they're saying it's not enough.
I mean, the problem has been very much that schools have said, we haven't been able to get the pupils back because we don't have enough space. How much of this money is actually going to create space, and how much of it is just, in inverted commas, going to be fixing leaky roofs?
Well, the details, of course, as ever with these big announcements, are scant. We're being promised that Rishi Sunak is going to give more information in his spending review later on in the year. What I want to know is how much of this is actually going to go and build new free schools in the North. That doesn't seem very clear to me, because that has been a flagship Tory building programme, and many, many people are not happy about it. In fact, in 2011, it was a Conservative Education Secretary, Michael Gove, who came in and cancelled scores of school building projects. Labour had set up this programme to pretty much refurbish every secondary school in England, and Michael Gove came in and cancelled it and said he was going to use the money to build these new free schools instead. So I'm very interested to know, is any of this capital spending, is that going to be used to build free schools? I was trying to get that information out of the Department for Education last night without any joy whatsoever, I must say.
And Sian, is this new money? When people hear £1 billion investment or any type of investment, it's often the question, is this just money that's been repurposed or moved forward, or is it brand new money they've discovered for this announcement?
Well, again, I don't think we know that yet either. I mean, the unions are welcoming this announcement this morning. Both the head teacher unions have come out and they've said, it's very welcome. It's not enough. I mean, I think there was a National Audit Office report a couple of years ago which said we needed £7 billion to refurbish schools in England, not £1 billion. So it's a start. But the unions are being very, very positive about it this morning, which makes me think that at least some of this is new money. And, that what the government is trying to do at the moment is very much get on board with the teaching unions, because they want all children to go back to school in September. Because if the kids don't go back to school in September, it's going to be very hard to see how all their parents can go back to work and how the economy can be kick-started so we can get out of this crisis that we're in. So very much at the moment, there's a lot of money being thrown at schools, a lot of talking to the unions so that they are on board in bringing the teachers into the schools in September and really reassuring parents it is safe to bring their kids back. So this is part, I think, of this whole let's engage with schools, let's make schools a priority, especially in the north, where, of course, they won all those seats, very keen to hang on to their working class voters.
Thank you very much. Sian Griffiths, that's Education and Families Editor for the Sunday Times. In the studio with us is Tom Newton-Dunn, Times Radio's chief political commentator. You're going to be here often. We're going to see you a lot early in the morning, Tom.
Good morning. Yes, thank you for dragging me in.
Yeah.
Delighted to be here.
Very chipper. Let's just talk about this education part of what looks like a government relaunch. Is this as big as this? Is that what the government are envisaging this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I think relaunch is a very good word for it. This is after 6 long months of coronavirus in existence. Remember, it was December the 31st, the Chinese officially declared it a major problem. Boris Johnson trying very hard to wrestle back control of his government's agenda. Remember, he got elected off the back of a great promise to level up the country, to save those left behind towns and areas that weren't getting the same sort of prosperity as the rest of the country. And tomorrow, a very big speech in the West Midlands, in one of those red wall seats that he managed to win off Labour that gave him such a big majority of 80. He will unveil exactly how. And because it's Boris Johnson, we know it's going to be spend, spend, spend. So a huge plan already to rebuild infrastructure, railways, but also schools, hospitals. And I think the schools announcement today is the first chapter in this, rebuilding a lot of schools that were in bad nick. And I think it probably wouldn't be a surprise either if you saw a lot of those schools in those sort of red wall seats, because at the centre of this grand master plan, this grand relaunch, or if you like, a return to where the government originally began, his government originally began, is a really political message. And that's, you are the people who elected us. We understand. You gave us your votes. You might have voted Labour before. We're not going to forget you. Just because we've gone through some tough times, we are going through some tough times, we're still going to level up. And that's, I think, why you'll probably hear Boris Johnson in this room a little later on talking about doubling down on levelling up.
The old Conservative idea is that you don't pay for things you can't afford. Had that already been abandoned in the election manifesto? Because one of the things we're seeing all the time is we're going to find more money, coronavirus costs this, it's billions and billions and billions. There's often not much of a reference to how this is going to be paid for. Is that part of the Boris Johnson agenda as well, just find the money at all costs?
I think that's always been part of the Boris Johnson agenda. I mean, I think there's, 2 chapters of Boris's premiership. The first is obviously the election on what he promised he would do, and then how on earth he's going to do that post-COVID and a post-coronavirus world, which is going to see an economy ravaged by what's going on with job losses coming up in the autumn when the furlough scheme is withdrawn and the general economic slowdown as a result. Remember, this was a Prime Minister elected off the back of a promise to spend roughly £250 billion more on all these levelling up measures. The economy is going to have to take a huge amount of stimulus to get going. So there is an economic consensus really across the board from left to right now that you're going to have to borrow a whole load of money to kickstart the engine of the economy. How you pay for it is going to be a question for some years later. Now, eventually, the British government is going to struggle with borrowing more money. There will be a limit to precisely how much you can borrow, how much you can spend on new schools, railways, whatever, before the debt market starts saying, now, wait a minute, you need to start paying that back. But I don't think we'll hear too much of that from Boris Johnson, either this morning or this week.
No matter how many times we ask him.
But you keep on trying. Yeah. You just keep on trying.
We must ask you about Sir Mark Sedwill. Looking at the front page of the Times, top civil servant quits amid Cummings' war with Whitehall. Not everyone will know who he is. So who is he and why is it important that he's gone and the manner in which he's gone?
So, Cabinet Secretary Sir Mark Sedwill, who is the chief Mandarin, they don't get more important in Whitehall if they're unelected than the Cabinet Secretary. Remember that's the person who sits on Boris Johnson's right-hand side through every Cabinet meeting, his most important advisor. He was there when Boris Johnson arrived. Theresa May appointed him. And he's a securocrat. He's, come up through the Foreign Office, doing various security jobs, ran the Home Office for Theresa May, and then Theresa May took him into Downing Street. So it's perhaps no huge surprise that a new Prime Minister might want a new broom. Most Cabinet Secretaries serve about 5 years or so. Boris Johnson clearly wants a new one. What I think is most interesting about this is not the name on the door, so to speak, but what this signifies, because Boris Johnson and the people around him, Dominic Cummings, his chief advisor, have made very little bones of how much they have a problem with the current Whitehall setup. They don't believe it delivers for the country, it delivers the sort of very radical agenda they want to level up and reshape the country. So I think Mark Sedwill is the first of quite a few significant changes as they shake up the whole system. Dominic Cummings addressed special advisors last week and made a reference to hard rain falling on the civil service.
I've never heard that before. Is that a thing?
Well, it is a thing now. Yeah. It really is.
You heard of hard rain?
No.
Well, hard rain.
We hadn't heard of 1 metre plus last week.
Yeah. It is falling upon Mark Sedwill this morning.
Okay.
Tom Newton-Dunn, thank you so much. Times Radio's chief political commentator. It is 6:16.
Times Radio.
I'm John Pienaar. Join me every Monday to Thursday from 4 on Times Radio. We're going to be talking about the news. We're going to be talking to people who make the news. And we're going to be discussing it and explaining it.
Join John Pienaar for the Drive Time show dedicated to the news that matters and the views that need to be heard.
We're going to be having conversation as well as a bit of confrontation from time to time.
Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive. This afternoon from 4 on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, Times Radio Breakfast with Asma Mir and Stig Abel.
So let's check out what else is happening today. BBC World leads with the news that the death toll from coronavirus across the world has reached 500,000 and more than 10 million cases have been identified since late last year. Half of the world's cases are in the US.
We've just been talking about it in the papers. Boris takes axe to civil services. The Express front page, it follows the news that Sir Mark Sedwill has left his job as Britain's most senior civil servant. The Express says it gives the Prime Minister the chance to shake up Whitehall. The FT is saying the shake-up is raising fears of some key civil service roles becoming politicised.
Now, the Mail goes with a warning that patients could have to wait up to a year for hip and knee replacements as the NHS imposes strict infection controls. Hospitals have huge backlogs to work through, as we know, and are running at about 50% capacity.
We are not amused. 2 E's. It's really hard to do headlines, I think.
You have to say in a Scottish accent.
Why am I saying and not you? I'm not going to begin this show by doing a fake Scottish accent.
No, don't do that.
That won't go down well. Anyway, so 2 E's is the headline in The Sun. Apparently, revolting hikers and tourists are infuriating royal staff by using the Queen's Balmoral estate as an outside toilet. Filthy and disrespectful is the locals' verdict.
Oh, well, it is absolutely revolting, but it's been a feature of lockdown, hasn't it? Unfortunately, public loos have been closed and, you've got to go sometimes. Not talking about me personally,
It's very tolerant of you.
This afternoon, Mariella Frostrup's first guest at 1 o'clock is the actor Rose McGowan, who took on the film mogul Harvey Weinstein. She's been telling Mariella why she never really liked acting.
I don't like leaving my mind and body to be predominantly, a man's, what their imagination is and what's coming out of my mouth and what I'm wearing, what I'm doing. And if you want that thing where you want to escape your own life and mind, then this is a job for you. It's the opposite for me. I found it punishing.
And you can hear more of Rose McGowan with Mariella at 1:05 today.
Now, social media was awash with muddy memories of Glastonbury this week. Have you been to Glastonbury?
I've never been. No, it doesn't. I'm afraid it doesn't. It doesn't appeal. Does it appeal to you?
No, I think the world divides into festival folk and non-festival folk, and I'm not that. But anyway, it was cancelled obviously because of coronavirus. But that didn't stop people reliving the action at Worthy Farm. People talking a lot about Bowie's 2000 set, and his song China Girl sparked a debate on Twitter about whether it's racist. Lyrics include visions of swastikas in my head.
Wow, memories.
You a Bowie fan?
I wasn't at the time, but I mean, there, a couple of his songs that I did love, but no, I mean, some people are absolutely adore and adulate, and I'm not one of them.
He's not right. I mean, he seems to me to be the sort of very anti-racist figure, isn't he?
Yeah.
Bowie, I would have thought. On a much smaller stage in Washington State, the comedian Sacha Baron Cohen, known for his provocative pranks that aim to expose racism, he put on a pair of denim dungarees and a straw hat to sing a song that included the lyrics, "Liberals, what we gonna do? Inject them with the Wuhan flu." Have a listen.
I ain't lying, it ain't no jokes. Corona is a liberal hoax. Corona is a liberal hoax. What we gonna do then? Dr. Fauci, what we gonna do? Inject him with the Wuhan flu. Inject him with the Wuhan flu. Come on. WHO, what we gonna do?
He's a clever guy, isn't he? I have to say, he's one clever guy.
He's got nerves as well, hasn't he?
He does, yeah.
That was at a rally, wasn't it?
Yeah. And they were all really joining in. They thought he was great.
People are tweeting at us at Times Radio to tell us that Bob Dylan's anti-war song is called "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall."
Yes.
So Hard Rain is in fact a Dylan.
Absolutely.
Did you know that?
Now you mentioned it, of
Yeah.
course I knew it.
Well,
but yeah, hard rains are going to fall. Absolutely.
People are tweeting us. So do tweet us when we don't know things, and you'll be tweeting us quite a lot at Times Radio if you want to get involved.
We're not going to say we are not experts. Okay, we are conduits.
Yeah.
So if we don't know something, please do get in touch and tell us politely. More on what's happening today in sport. David Spencer from TalkSport can tell us more. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning.
Right, so what's happening today then?
Well, we've got one fixture today in terms of the Premier League after really the FA Cup dominated over the weekend. So with these fixtures all compressed because of the delay because of coronavirus, we have to squeeze in all these games. So just to recap over the weekend in terms of the FA Cup, it was the 5th of March when the FA Cup was last played. And then this weekend was the quarterfinals. And actually, Asma, on this day, had the world not been put on pause like it has been over the last few months, England fans might have been getting just a bit nervous about Euro 2020 and the knockout stage ahead of the quarterfinals at the weekend, actually. So England might have been playing the likes of Spain, Portugal, Netherlands or France tonight or tomorrow. But instead, it's been the FA Cup. And we saw... Actually, if you like a few, Asma, I know you might like a few of these sort of football-y stats. Not a single home side won. It was the away side that won every game, and Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City all through to the semi-finals, which means all the favourites are through, and we could have, when we get to August the 1st, a Manchester derby as an FA Cup final.
David, have you heard that Asma's a bit of a geek? I feel like I went on Chris Evans' show and made that revelation last week.
News travels fast, doesn't it? Thanks, guys. I mean, I just think, just quickly, David, it's so weird to be talking about the Euros because, it loomed so large, and then we've completely forgotten about what could have been.
Well, exactly. And in fact, Scotland could have been. But we just don't know whether they would have been nervous about the knockout stages at this point. And in fact, international football is kind of forgotten because all the domestic leagues are wrapping up very quickly around Europe and around the world. And then we'll see where we are when we reset in probably September, early October to see if we can play international football. And then we have this forced schedule. They've told us the Euros will take place next summer. But of course, that's going to mean everything has to get squeezed in between. So exactly right. We've kind of forgotten that. And the likes of Harry Kane and Marcus Rashford all coming back for England has been very exciting, because they wouldn't have been playing in the games they played over the last few weeks had they taken place at the original dates. But then we'll be back in the cycle of they've all got to stay fit for next summer for England fans. And there'll be a lot of games in between then and now. But the Premier League restarts tonight and then the rest of the week, Asma, because we've got a lot of games to get in.
Absolutely. And I have to say, we are loving it in our household, because it just gives us a bit of normality and something to talk about. Just briefly, what about the tennis?
Well, I think it's really interesting that tennis has got a bit of a challenge, especially after Novak Djokovic's slight coronavirus slip last week. But Dan Evans had sort of really put himself as Britain's number one before, again, the break, getting up to a career high world number 28. And he underlined how he is the British number one at the weekend by beating Kyle Edmund in this Battle of the Brits tournament. It was an exhibition event, but it actually effectively was a pretty good competitive week that saw Andy Murray involved, of course. Dan Evans beating Kyle Edmund 6-3, 6-2. And when the season again does restart properly for tennis, it's going to be interesting to watch. Dan Evans has had a colourful career. I think that's the best way to put it, Asma.
I think you're right, David. Thank you so much. That is David Spencer from TalkSport.
Now, I think you probably will have heard of this, China's annual dog meat festival, which is reaching its peak despite efforts to stop populists eating unusual animals. Some cities have already banned eating some animals, including rats, snakes and porcupines. And this obviously comes in the context of coronavirus and the scandal of wet markets. So is this a time where some of China's buying and eating habits will change? Well, Didi Tang is the Times' Beijing correspondent and joins us now. Didi, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How shocking is this within China? It always seems shocking to us, and some of the cruelty around it may seem shocking, but the actual eating of dog meat does seem shocking. What are the traditions around it in China?
Oh, the tradition here, I think, is limited to certain parts of the country. We're not talking about the entire country. I grew up in China. I never ate any piece of dog meat or any part of the dog. So the practice exists, but it's only limited to certain parts of the country. And we're talking about this city called Yuli in southwest part of the country. So there's a kind of a tradition, and that tradition has gotten amplified over the last few decades as China got rich. People finally, they had the money, they could get more than enough to feed their stomachs. So they started to, revise some of the traditions, and then they eat a dog meat because they think this is the way for them to beat the summer heat. So usually the festival starts on the summer solstice, which would be June the 21st, I think, this year. So it started. And so this year, people were very curious. It's not like dog meat eating is controversial, but I think people are very surprised that this year the dog festival should have proceeded despite in the context of the coronavirus. Because, there's a renewed interest in food safety. And I think there's a trend here picking up the momentum here in China against the consumption of exotic meats, such as dog meat and then cat meat.
Is there a sense also that China is more conscious now than it ever has been of its reputation around the world? So what might be local traditions that could be left alone now have to be regarded through how the world will see China?
Definitely. I think, after coronavirus, even Beijing authority, they started to realize maybe, some of the tradition doesn't fit with the modern times anymore. And then maybe it's a time for us to move on. So you've seen kind of two things that have happened in the past several months. Is one, two China cities, actually, they have adopted laws to outright ban the consumption of dog meat and then the cat meat. And we're talking about the city of Shenzhen and the Zhuhai. Both are in the southern parts of China, and Zhuhai borders the city of Hong Kong. So that was a very positive sign that China probably, those two cities are taking the lead to ban the consumption of dog meat and then the cat meat. And also there was a order coming from the National Agriculture Ministry. So when they released the annual sort of the livestock category, and people found the dogs have been removed from the livestock category. And instead, the ministry has come out to say, look, the dogs have become companions of the humankind.
Yeah.
So that's a big change. And then the ministry has a statement.
There's no tradition, is there,
Go ahead.
just on that? There's no tradition there's little tradition of dogs as companions in China.
It wasn't such. I think probably I was talking about centuries ago, right? And dogs they have been used, to guard the homes, and also for labor. But I think in the past decades, started to see people start to keep dogs inside homes rather than to be at the gate to bark at the visitors. No. That has changed, and then people start. You can see the pet industry has really bloomed in China. Like people, they consider the dogs to be family members, and that's very remarkable. In the last probably a decade or two, people they start to welcome cats and the pets into their homes. And if you go to the online shops, and then they say the pet sector is one of the fast growing sectors in China's online shopping. And you can see people's attitude has shifted.
Didi Tang, thank you very much indeed.
And if you would like to stay well informed every day with opinion, analysis and advice from experts like Didi Tang, then subscribe to The Times and The Sunday Times by going to thetimes.co.uk/Times Radio. It is 6:30. Let's get a roundup of the latest news and sport.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
From the Times Radio newsroom, I'm Alex Dibble. A £1 billion, decade-long plan for schools is being promised by the government to create a country where it says everyone has the chance to succeed. It will focus on building and refurbishment. Creating space for a rising number of secondary school pupils is also one of the priorities. The Sunday Times Education and Families editor, Sian Griffiths, says the announcement's being welcomed by unions.
Both the head teacher unions have come out and they've said, it's very welcome. It's not enough. I think there was a National Audit Office report a couple of years ago which said we needed £7 billion to refurbish schools in England, not £1 billion. So it's a start. But the unions are being very, very positive about it this morning, which makes me think that at least some of this is new money.
The UK's top civil servant, Sir Mark Sedwill, has confirmed he plans to stand down in September. In a letter to Boris Johnson, he said it was the right time to go as the government moved to the next phase of its coronavirus recovery plan. Times Radio's political reporter Charlotte Ivers says his departure is further evidence of a growing trend.
This is certainly a government that has no love for Whitehall or any of its institutions. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of this in the weeks and months to come. Dominic Cummings spoke to special advisors across Whitehall a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about this idea of a hard rain falling on Whitehall.
Sir Mark Sedwill has joint roles as Cabinet Secretary and National Security Advisor. The latter will be fulfilled by David Frost, Boris Johnson's Brexit negotiator. 4 people have been charged after an unlicensed music event in South London turned violent. A group of police officers were injured in Brixton on Wednesday. 2 of those facing charges, including a 16-year-old boy, are due in court this morning. More than 500,000 people worldwide have now died after testing positive for COVID-19. Figures from the Johns Hopkins University in the US also show the number of global cases has passed 10 million. And face-to-face Brexit talks get back underway today for the first time since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. The UK has until Wednesday to ask for an extension to the transition deadline, which is currently the end of the year. A wet and windy start, particularly for northern and central parts of the UK, feeling very cool across the country. Now with the sports is Russell Hargreaves.
Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola says he's got 2 targets in mind after his side booked their place in the semi-finals of the FA Cup. It's Arsenal next up in the last 4 following a 2-0 win over Newcastle.
When we restart after lockdown, it was this game, the FA Cup in the Champions League. And of course the Premier League games to mathematically secure the qualification. But so happy for the performance and for the come back to London to play against Arsenal in semi-final.
Kevin De Bruyne and Raheem Sterling, the players on target at St James's Park. Earlier, Arsenal secured their place in the semis with a late 2-1 victory at Sheffield United, also live on TalkSport.
Ceballos takes over, goalkeeper's come out, and Ceballos has won it through the legs of Henderson and into the net.
Chelsea have earned the right to face informed Manchester United in the other last 4 tie on the back of a 1-0 win at Leicester. Manager Frank Lampard full of praise for his match winner, Ross Barkley.
I played with Ross. He's a great lad, a great example of when you train at
at a level when you have that attitude and when you have the quality that Ross has. He can score goals, he can shoot with both feet, he makes the box, he defended well, he showed great discipline in his game against Manchester City. So he's just reaping the benefits.
Both FA Cup semi-finals will again be live on TalkSport across the 17th and 18th of July. Elsewhere, Watford remain dangerously close to the Premier League's relegation zone. They're just a point clear following a 3-1 defeat to Southampton, for whom Danny Ings scored 2 more goals. Things were made even harder for Nigel Pearson's side, though, with 3 players unavailable after allegedly breaking lockdown rules.
I'm not making any further comment on that until I've got all the facts. But, 3 players were not available.
There's one more Premier League game this evening where a win for either Crystal Palace or Burnley would see them go 8th in the table. Huddersfield are still in the Championship's relegation zone following yesterday's 3-1 defeat to Nottingham Forest, who are back up to 4th. Sheffield Wednesday beating Bristol City 2-1 in the early kick-off. According to the back page of this morning's Times, Ben Stokes looks